And now, to conclude this nice conference, we will deliver a presentation on the corporate governance culture in Lebanon, with Hadi Al-Assad, coordinator of IFG, as a moderator, Frédéric Chemali from Malia Group, and Joe Ashar from Sabis Group. Please welcome them.
This conference, since this morning, has been conducted in the two languages, English and Arabic, so I think we could continue on this panel in the same way, but I will start in English. First of all, I introduce myself. I am Hadi Al-Assad, the coordinator of the Institute for Finance and Governance. For those who have been this morning in the opening session, they heard about the IFG, but I have another hat, which is independent board member, chairman of Risk Committee, and member of Audit Committee at First National Bank. Let me just introduce a bit in the beginning my colleagues on the panel. Joe Ashar, who is a board member of Sabis Holdings. As you know, Sabis is a group involved in the education business. The Sabis network has an active presence in 20 countries over 5 continents, with a team of more than 8,000 employees. And Mr. Ashar has been involved in the transition of Sabis, the 4th generation, family-owned, to a global multinational organization, and he is leading now the implementation of corporate and family business governance. We have also in the panel Mr. Frédéric Chemali. Frédéric is an advisor in law, governance, and business. He is the corporate secretary of Malia Group, where he administers the governance framework. He is also managing partner at Chemali and Company, a family company, active a corporate advisory firm, and he is a columnist in Al-Iqtisadi, which is, I think, a monthly economical, an online economical magazine. And he regularly writes about the law, governance, risk, compliance, economics, and business in general. The title of this panel is Nurturing the Corporate Governance Culture in Lebanon. And this title, I think, it's not only for me, but for a lot of people in Lebanon. It's really a struggle and a strike continuing for now years, and which probably will continue also for years. However, we see slowly significant signals of the evolution of the culture in some corporates. And this evolution, I will have the occasion to talk about it through what the IFG is doing in terms of raising awareness about corporate governance in various sectors, and how we feel the reaction from the market, from the companies, about implementing the corporate governance in their institutions. We'll have probably also the chance to talk with the colleagues about the culture of corporate governance, as well as the implementation of corporate governance, is not a single one way and a single framework of corporate governance. Each company, each country has its own environment, history, that could engage in implementing a corporate governance adapted to each group and to each company. But now let's start with Joe. Very briefly in the beginning, Joe, what did Sabis decide to embark on the governance journey, and how did you go about it now?
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. Can you hear me? Can everyone? Okay. So basically, in our case, as you said, different companies have different driving forces and different approaches. in our case, with our history dating back to 1886, with the initial school within the group, first and foremost, the key driving force was ensuring continuity of the organization. We had been around for more than 100 years. We wanted to make sure that we are around for hundreds more. So ensuring continuity was the first driving force. But in parallel, at the same time, the organization was growing very rapidly. When you're in a situation of having 4 or 5 schools across the world, consider them business units in any type of business, dealing with issues is quite different from when you start having 30 and 40 and 50 and 60 business units across 5 continents. So ensuring having more effective and efficient management systems, control systems, and other types of due processes to ensure scalable growth of the organization. So these were the driving forces in a way. How we went about it, probably in most situations things happen with informal actions here and there until someone realizes that there's much more to it than just taking separate individual actions, and that it has to be part of a more cohesive approach. And that is when the company decided to seek a consulting assignment, then engaged someone in-house, myself, as a non-family board member, the first non-family board member, with a major role of leading the governance process throughout its evolution. So that's basically it. Now, along the way, we did engage different consulting firms on different specific topics. A key one was the IFC, the International Finance Corporation, with whom we worked quite aggressively at the early stages.
Thank you. Frederic, maybe you can also answer the same question, how and why you did go through this.
Hello, everyone. There are many similarities. Like the guiding force was to ensure continuity over generations. Let me tell you briefly. Malia Group is a holding, and it has under it 27 companies across the region. But a decade earlier, or 15 years earlier, it wasn't like that. It was a second generation running companies in 2 sectors. Now we are in 6. So now the third generation is taking over, and there are like two factors that develop. First of all, we have entered 4 new sectors, which makes the decision process more complex, and you need the framework for that. And the second one is the second generation, which is 2 brothers, is handing over to the third generation. They are 5 sisters and cousins. So they are now 7, and this is another complexity. So basically, this is the guiding force. Now, why we're doing it, we have 2 reasons. Why we're implementing governance in Malia Group, we have 2 reasons. One is generational succession inside the company to ensure that the third generation is taking properly, and the third generation is taking the proper decisions inside the group, not trespassing on other people, other executives' functions. So this is internally to ensure management is proper and on the long run. The second reason of governance is to attract investors, since we're here talking about investors. When you do a governance framework and you publish it, and you are in the market in 6 sectors, and always developing new projects, you need partners, you need investors, you need money, you need to raise money somewhere. It could be investors, it could be banks, it could be stock markets. So this is the external reason why we are doing our governance framework. Now, how we did it? It was a clean process. It's not like at Sabis, an idea. We had set a plan, like we had a consultant who. It's an interesting story, in fact. We had set a plan in 2014. A consultant set a plan for us. His main idea in mind was to go to get listed on a stock exchange. So he set a plan of 3 to 5 years. What we should do in corporate governance in order to be ready for an IPO. So, and then that was in 2014. Then I was hired to implement this governance framework. There are two parts. There is a part where you start composing the bodies, which is the board, the audit committee, the ESCOM, the classical one. We don't have any specific ones. And you draft policies and procedures and charters on how to conduct business through these bodies. But there is a very interesting exercise that we did is how we chose the independent directors. And like we had two versions inside the company. The chairman wanted to go from a place where we needed a set of skills inside the board to guide us on specific topics, meaning international business, political and legal risks, finance, etc. So the exercise took us 7 months in parallel to drafting all the charters. And we reached a point where we chose people with the proper profile and who have the trust of the family, because the family not only owns the business, it manages the business. And trust is an important factor. So we did it, and we convened a board 7 months after, and the first board had the main objective of approving all the governance framework. So basically the 3 to 5 years plan was achieved in 7 months. And now it's been like 3 years we're running it smoothly. It's comfortable at all levels inside the company.
Still working?
Yes.
I have a question. The independent board members are all Lebanese, or are they foreign?
No, they are they are Lebanese. We have one of the finest, two of the finest bankers in Lebanon. We have a Lebanese who's CEO of a multinational based in Switzerland, and we have an ex-minister.
And were they all? Did the family or the chairperson know all of them beforehand?
No. He knew too.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Actually, just to react on this, you asked about the independent, but I always repeat the experience of Malia Group. They are, at my knowledge, the only group in Lebanon whereby there are, out of 7 board members, there are 4 independent and 3 from the family. So, yeah.
How they went about it, it's quite a difficult...
Okay, so coming back to the topic of our conference on nurturing the culture of corporate governance, Frederic, how does nurturing a corporate governance culture protect investors from illegal and unfair practices? You know that you are very keen on investors' side, so...
Okay, nothing is fail-proof. Like if you implement a corporate governance framework, it doesn't say that after implementing it, you will not find a breach in terms of illegal and unfair practices. But when you implement corporate governance, you will minimize the risks. And once you take measures to implement the corporate governance, along the way it becomes a culture inside the company. Let me tell you briefly what does it entail. It's not only about corporate governance is the leading process inside a company, but it's not only about a board and 2-3 committees and resolutions and minutes of meetings. It's not like that. There are many points that I will enumerate now that affect the conduct of the board, committees, management, and staff in a way to minimize illegal and unfair practices. The first point surely is the board. Its resolutions, it approves all the policies, all the procedures, all the charters, etc. The second point is a code of ethics. The code of ethics is something very important to implement inside your company and to publish it, to say to the world, to say to investors that if you come invest with us, this is how we conduct business. That's the second point. A third point is compliance with laws and regulations. This is mandatory compliance, and we comply with these with the applicable laws in every territory that we operate, in terms of how we establish a new company, transactions are being done, etc. Another point is compliance. Compliance to international standards, it has two aspects. There is voluntary compliance and there is mandatory compliance. Mandatory compliance is what our banks who lend us or who partner with us impose on us to disclose. They spoke about it earlier, KYC, AML regulations, etc. The voluntary compliance is when you choose yourself to abide by, to comply with international rules and regulations that are not mandatory to you, but you chose voluntarily to comply with these. For instance, we at Malia Group, we comply with, in terms of bribery and corrupt practices, we voluntarily comply with the UK Anti-Bribery Act and the US Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Again, when you comply voluntarily with this, you are sending a big message to investors that we have adopted your standards. It's easier for you to come and conduct business with us. It's like a vote of confidence. This is voluntary compliance. There is as well external audit. External audit, I don't mean only auditors of big accounting firms. We have partners who audit us on a yearly basis on quality and the compliance standards, whether in our manufacturing plants of medicine or in technology. And whenever these come and tell you that these are our standards, if we're going to manufacture at your premises, you have to fully abide by these, and you comply, and each year you get audited and you score the full score. It's as well a vote of confidence for the investors. Now, all these, they don't have just to be only on paper. In order to implement them inside the company, we train our people. Like we do training when we onboard employees, we do a full training day on what they should comply with, what are the governance standards, how to conduct business, etc. And on a unregular basis, whenever required, whenever partners require as well, we conduct compliance trainings inside the company on specific codes. It could be a pharmaceutical code, it could be the UK Anti-Bribery Code. So it's a never-ending process of raising awareness and on good conduct. The final point that we did not reach an optimal status today is transparency and disclosure. It's a matter of culture in the Lebanese companies, and we have sat earlier with many companies, and we saw that they do not publish, disclose many of their operations and financials, etc. But we are working on it, and compared to our environment, we are a bit advanced in this. So when all these points are ensured inside the company, you are making sure that employees and management, whenever they conduct business, they are aware of all these rules and principles and laws. And you are consequently minimizing the risk of breaches, the risk of unfair practices, and the risk of illegal practices. And this is how you will, governance would raise the confidence of investors.
Thank you. Let me go back to Joe. As we know, the majority of companies in Lebanon are family-owned. This being in mind, what exactly do we mean, or do you mean in Sabis when you talk about governance? So if you could elaborate and give us examples of the key governance system that you have considered or could be considered in general.
Yeah, of course. I will go back and to something that Frederic just mentioned. Although he said that the starting point was a plan or a 3 to 5 plan of an IPO. We had and still have no such plan. However, the situation could be more or less the same because we still have internal investors. When we started thinking about this, the third generation were 2 members involved. The fourth generation, 5 to 6 members. The fifth generation now, it's 12 people and counting. So we're talking about 12 plus 6 plus 2, that's 18. And these are all investors. So the same due process and due diligence has to be done for these investors. So with this in mind, in our case, there were 2, let's say, under 2 groupings, 2 major groupings. The traditional corporate governance, so the board, the authority matrix, the committees, etc. But there was also the family side of governance, and the 2 key pillars there for us were the ownership policy and the employment policy. So the ownership policy defines basically who in the family can own shares, spouses, children, in-laws, can they or can they not own shares. And this is a more difficult decision than I just stated. It may take months, if not years, to reach a consensus on this. The second element of the ownership policy is how can one transfer shares or sell shares or bequeath shares, and how do we value these shares since there is no open and public market to value them. So this is a key pillar of the family governance in our case. The second element is the employment policy. Again, when we're talking about 18 people today, do all these have a right to work at the company? The short answer is absolutely not. Not a right. Do they have a birthright, I mean? Absolutely not. Are they obligated to work at the company? Again, absolutely not. They can own shares and not work. So we had to put in place details of a policy to manage all of this. So these were the 2 elements that we were dealing with, being specifically a family-owned business, which I think was the case, is the case also in Malia.
What has actually changed between comparing the before governance and the after governance?
The biggest, if I were to picture it, figuratively, before going through the governance process, the 4 roles, I will separate 4 roles: family, shareholders, board members, and management. The 4 roles were all in one, really, played by the same person, and the board meetings, the shareholders meetings, the family councils, and the executive management meeting were all happening together at the same time, often Sunday or a 5 o'clock tea with a nice cake. The after, so this is picture 1 before. Picture 2 after, these roles were separated. So on the one hand, we have family and shareholders, then we have board members, then we have executive management. Now some people, and independent. Now some people may still wear cover more than one role. So some may be family and board, some may be board and management, but at least we have separated the roles, clarified the responsibilities, clarified the authorities, and separated the meeting groups and the meeting times and the subjects covered. So I guess this would be it, really.
Who does what?
Who does what? There's an interesting, if I may, we worked with the IFC, and the IFC have an interesting impact scorecard for corporate governance. So let me go, it's 6 points, 7 points. Let me list them very briefly and tell you where we were and where we are. So the ones where corporate governance had the most impact for us as an organization were sustainability and board effectiveness, because there was no formal board, and because ensuring continuity was our most important element. Then came organizational efficiency and management control, as we mentioned, and then to a much lesser extent, access to capital, reputation, profitability, much less impact. Having said that, this was in 2010. If I were to run through this scorecard today, I would score differently on it, because since, although we're not going for an IPO or going public, we have just formed a couple of years ago a major joint venture with independent investors and institutional investors to cover the African market, so Africa Crest Holdings. So had we not had proper governance systems in place, although we had not foreseen that we will be coming across such a JV, but had we not had the proper governance and systems in place, this could have probably jeopardized such a structure, or at the very least put us in a much weaker position towards the external investment. Absolutely. Yeah. So we were coming to the table in a much more self-assured. So if I were to rate today, access to capital through a joint venture would rate much higher today than it did for us in 2010.
Frédéric, if you have governance in the group, do you consider that you have better chances gaining and keeping investors?
Yes. Surely, it's for gaining investors, getting new investors, and keeping them. It's a bit like if you're going to buy a car. It's the same mindset in a different context. If you're an investor, you're a buyer, you want to buy a car, you're going to go search for the reputation of a car. You can either choose a technologically advanced car, you go for German cars. You want reliability, you go for Japanese cars. So you're the investor, you want a technologically advanced car, you go and buy a car, you invested in it, and you start driving it, and if you're satisfied with it, you will keep it. So it's like you will retain it, and if you want to change it, if you're satisfied, you're gonna buy another German car. So it's a very simple concept, but the same mindset in other contexts. So definitely yes.
And which type of investors are you looking for?
No, not
on the personal side, yes. But,
no, in fact, like Malia Group, like 10, 15 years ago, as I was saying, it used to be in two sectors, and these two sectors, like, they are 80 years old, and since 10 years until now, we have ventured into 4 new sectors. So really, we have, like, we're not only a classical bureaucratic company. We have an entrepreneurial mindset. So we're always on the lookout for new sectors, for new businesses, etc. So basically, all types of investors are of interest to us, whether to partner with us to share our risks, to give us for financial, to fund our operations. All types, we're open. Like we're a startup looking for partnership, looking for growth.
Or it could be through stock exchange.
Yes, definitely. If you have an
There is a new program coming soon.
If you have an active stock exchange, which program?
No, we'll talk about it another time. Joe, still, excuse me?
Catch an idea.
Yeah. Everything on time is perfect, so we'll leave it for another time. Joe, still talking about investors, what was the impact of implementing governance in Sabis, and in particular any benefits for investors?
Yeah, the benefits really go back to what Frédéric mentioned earlier. If I were, one key area is reduced risks. And again, this is a valid benefit for internal investors, family investors, as well as partners like in the joint venture, or eventually when you seek external investors. So reduced risks is critical, whether internal risks with the proper controls or external risks with compliance, as you said, proper compliance to regulations, to laws, etc. Another key benefit, I would say, is a streamlined or a more formal decision-making process. So making decisions when you have 2 or 3 or 4 people involved is relatively easy compared to when you have a dozen or dozens, and when you have 8,000 employees around the world, and when you have 60 different business units. So putting in place proper process for decision making was a critical additional benefit, I would say. These were the 2 main ones that ripple on to investors, whether internal or external.
Again, maybe one more question. Based on this experience in Sabis Group, what were, in your point of view, the keys of real success in implementing the corporate governance?
I think the most obvious and obviously stated is commitment at the top. If you don't have commitment at the top, you will get nowhere. If you just drive it from below without commitment at the top, you will go nowhere. But commitment at the top, again, is not enough. And, you have 2 companies that you've invited today, and in both situations, a common point is having what I would refer to, the IFC refers to them as such, is a corporate governance champion. So you have a person, Frédéric or me, in different situations, who actually own and drive the process. You need everybody's commitment, but you need someone to drive the process, to think about it morning and night and drive it through. And last, and nothing to do with corporate governance, anyone who has ever been involved in a project, no matter what the project is, knows that the basis, a basic element or a basic tool is a clear action plan. So the action plan, very simply, would say what is to be done, by whom, and when. So what, who, and when. And it is something that sounds very simple, but you will be surprised that many people embark on many projects without having clearly defined who's doing what, and then start battling among them on whose responsibility it is. So I think these were the 3 main elements.
I wanted to add something on Joe. He was speaking about a commitment at the top. Like we always speak about corporate governance, how it affects us in sustainability and towards investors and stakeholders. I just wanted to add that it comforts employees inside the group that a company is being directed by a board and not by one person.
Absolutely.
You feel at the I mean, we were talking about board effectiveness and board efficiency. Do your respective boards feel really more comfortable with the implementation of governance and feeling the progress in terms of performance, in terms of functioning on the multiple levels of the company, including, of course, the various employees and senior management, or no?
I would say absolutely. Going back to the employees for a minute, knowing that decisions about them and about their future will be made through a formal and fair process is critical and not up to a single person. Or knowing where they stand, because 8,000 employees, there's no way we're going to have 8,000 family members. So the critical roles, the CFO, myself and other vice presidents are non-family. So such people at this level have to feel comfortable that there is fair treatment between family and non-family. So that is another important critical element, I think, in the equation.
One more question before I leave the floor to the audience. Frederic, I know you are not Jacques Sarraf himself, but would you feel able to answer a question concerning, as it is the topic of the conference today, and we are talking about stock exchange and the Capital Market Authority, what would make Malia Group list itself on the Beirut Stock Exchange? Excuse me? It's coming. You were not here in the morning. His Excellency the Governor announced that it will be.
About the old one.
Old one. Okay.
And I will detail Eli's answer honestly. But let me start with where I usually start. Foreign direct investment. Foreign direct investment in Lebanon is very low. It used to be like 3-point-something billion 3 to 5 years ago, and a couple of years ago it decreased to 2.5 billion. And in these 2.5 billions, once, I don't know if it was here, there was a speaker telling us that in these 2.5 billion, you have a part of it that is invested in real estate. So basically this is not investment, it's money that is coming from abroad and being buried in a land. It's not in investment operations. It doesn't affect the economy. And the second part is transit. There is transit in. They count in the transit in this 2.5 billion foreign direct investment. Transit is products that are shipped to your country and shipped elsewhere. They are not entering your economic system. So basically, these $2.5 billion, they go down a lot. I don't know how much, but they go down a lot. So we are very low in terms of foreign direct investment. And what we really need is capital inflows. The stock market could be a place where a capital would flow in. But in order to have to get listed on the Beirut Stock Exchange, we have to have confidence in this Beirut Stock Exchange. We have to have an active stock exchange, a liquid stock exchange. So basically, I'm not a specialist in this, but I will talk as a corporate guy. What is my perception?
Consider yourself ready to go if the stock exchange is active.
Yes. Okay. What do I need exactly in the stock exchange? Like my perception of the stock exchange is very simple. It's you have a guy who sells, you have a guy who buys, and someone to operate this transaction. So first of all, and each one feeds the other. So first of all, we don't have an operator for the stock exchange. There was a law in 2011, law number 61, that stipulated that the rights of the operating the stock exchange should be given to a private company. Now, it's basically, it should be given to an international operator. And if it's given to an international operator, it will be a vote of confidence to the stock, to the Beirut Stock Exchange. And I would be interested in joining. That's from the side of the operator. From the side of us companies, we need the possibility of having the widest range of companies to get listed on the stock exchange. Not only banks, not only major companies. And to do this, we need differential listings, specific listings. I would say for family businesses and for startups. Now, I have heard that family businesses is being worked on, still to go startups. Why? Because even if it's a major family business in Lebanon and it can pay the fees and go through the process of getting listed, there is a psychological factor that blocks them from getting listed. Cultural one that blocks them. They are not ready to give a part of their capital to investors. So if you produce a differential listing for them that incentivize them to give up this part of capital in return for fees, I don't know, incentives in this listing, you would have a new range of companies that get listed, and more activity brings more profitability. Startups, it's not the topic today, but briefly, startups are companies who have a product or a service, and they are eager to market it, sell it, and break through because they don't have initially money. And since they don't have initially money, they are looking for financing. They cannot get listed on the main platform of a stock exchange because it's too costly. So when you produce a differential listing for them, much cheaper, maybe a second platform, you encourage them to list. That's from the part of the companies. From the investors, maybe the regulation should permit the most liberal
flexibility
trading.
And attractiveness.
Flexibility. The more you have transaction, the more you have activity. So and each idea feeds the other, and consequently the stock exchange would become active, and we would be interested in joining.
Thank you, Frederic. And I agree indeed on the operator side and on the investor side. But for me, it seems that the main key player in this still are the companies. And we are really facing, all is linked, as you said, the egg or the chicken before. But it is a matter of culture. And all what is related to opening capital, to implement governance, to separate and segregate duties in a company, it is something that's still in Lebanon, in my point of view, very difficult to implement for cultural reasons.
Yes.
And this is why, for me, the whole process of implementing governance from A to Z, because even when, as Joe was mentioning, if the board is agreeing on a policy to implement the governance, you will fight later on the various other levels to have this policy of corporate governance well understood, people adhering to it and implementing it. So for me, it's a very long process, honestly. And we as institute, we have from the beginning considered that we have to accomplish a double mission. First one is to inform, and this is to raise awareness, and this is why we try to organize as much as possible conferences, seminars, workshops, or what could help the companies more and more understanding the necessity of the corporate governance. And the second thing is the trainings. So to put programs to help these people understanding better what they could have heard from here and from there. Any additional?
Yes,
before
I would like to add, Hadi, on what you said. The situation, I agree with your assessment, but I believe the situation has changed and is changing more rapidly than we may think. And this for several reasons. First of all, many Lebanese-based companies are growing in size and have spread across the four corners of the world. Secondly, in many older established companies, the newer generations have all been, for the vast majority, have studied abroad and have worked abroad before joining the family business. So they come with much more openness and much more progressive ideas. And
relations.
And international relations. And last but not least, the startups. We are seeing a very active startup scene in Lebanon. Many angel investors, many funds focusing on startups. And in my mind, that could be one of the solutions to many problems in Lebanon. And the startup companies, I know because I have had to deal with one or two specific cases, have had difficulty getting established and finding funds in Lebanon, and found it easier to do so in other countries in the Gulf, which is a shame really for us, because it is our human capital who is going to seek opportunities elsewhere.
So and plus they can protect their creations outside intellectual much more than here.
I can't then agree with you, Joe, because at the Institute we are regularly approached, and it is approached by family groups. As I say very often, we never had a group saying, please help me implementing the governance from A to Z. You have someone who come and say, please help me from Y to Z, and one from A to B, whatever. But it is in the culture. It started indeed having this in the scope. It is, but still we are really far from. You know that on the 31st of October 2017, after several roundtables we organized at the IFG during 2 years with the various sectors. We did a roundtable with the industrials, one roundtable with the traders, one table with the lawyers, one with the internal auditors, with the women's on board, with the family business network, with the RDCL, with a lot of them. And we didn't want, in our concept, we didn't want to have the same experience, for example, our French friends in France had by imposing through the quoted and listed companies a sort of code. So, because I remember, and Fred is part of this follow-up committee, first session when we raised the possibility of having a code of governance for Lebanon, people were just shouting on me. And I suggested a sort of charter for the board members. Why would you ask to be? So we at that time decided just to have it like a platform of recommendation. And this platform of recommendation of 10 recommendations has been adopted during a conference that happened in, and we still have, as institute, but as all the companies themselves, we have a lot of work to do in this raising awareness and in this accompagnement of the companies. Any questions from the floor? Please, Fadi.
Thank you. First, congratulations on this very interesting session. I thank all of you for the informative presentations. I have a comment and a question. My comment regarding your question, Hani, is if Malia would list on the Beirut Stock Exchange. Having corporate governance requirements is one of the prerequisites of a listing, but definitely is not the reason why you would list or doesn't enable you to list. The cost of listing on a real stock exchange is very expensive. because of the requirements afterwards for due diligence, for reporting, for all the things that the stock exchange enforces on you. So when companies list, they look at the benefits. And the major benefit of listing is the liquidity in the market, the size of the market, the number of investors, the activity, the volume of trades, and the driving forces to get the prices up because they get the financial rewards. And coming back to the comment on whether we have a stock exchange, we need to have an active and liquid stock exchange, otherwise we will not have a successful stock exchange. My question relates to another comment that was made about how investors or stakeholders would look to a company that's being managed by a board, by a number of people. Here, I tend to disagree a little bit. I think management by a board is not a good thing. Management should be by a CEO, and boards have a different role of putting the strategy and oversight and making sure that the stakeholders as a whole are looked after. Lebanese law gives powers of the chairman and general manager and puts the chairman as the person who is legally in charge, whereas in my point of view, it's the CEO who should be legally in charge. My question for two successful companies that are applying corporate governance in a very practical manner, can we have a movement to change the Lebanese law so that the differences between the role of a chairman and the role of CEO are enacted, and we have this rather than separation or not? And another thing that I find that most boards tend to have directors in them, senior management. And again, from my point of view, that's not right. The only person who can be on the board is the CEO and not the management, senior management. So I don't know what Sabis and Malia have in their boards, but I would recommend that they look at that and that separation of responsibility. Thank you very much.
I would, first of all, I would clarify, I think there is absolutely no question that the company should not be managed by the board. In our case, it's very clear. The company is managed by a CEO, period. The board has an oversight role. And again, as you said, the Lebanese law says the, Président Directeur Général or whatever. And I think some people are working on changing that. In our case, fine, you have to abide by that from a legal point of view. But from a practical point of view, in our situation, it is very clear, clean cut. The chairperson is a different person from the CEO, and the board has an oversight role on the CEO. Where we are still not where we would like to be is on the independent directors that Frédéric mentioned. We found it more difficult than we thought, but I agree with you. Again, in our charter, we should have at least half of the board members as independent board members, independent directors. So I think we're in agreement. We're there on the separation of powers, absolutely. We're not there on the independence of the board yet.
For me, same as Joe, maybe we misused the word management. The board governs and the chief officers, they manage. So we agree on this. On the separation of chairman from CEO, I think it's a management decision. I wouldn't lobby with the parliament to introduce it in the law, because it's still a debate. There is nothing that proves that the split is better than joining both of them. I would go more on things to lobby on that would have financial benefits, such as the differential listing.
I agree, but at least the law should not force you to have a single person.
On this point, it is one of the 10 recommendations the platform of the conference of the 31st of October 2017 has raised. And I had personally the chance to discuss with the deputy member of the parliament in charge of the committee of the revision of laws. And they promised that the separation and dissociation will be in the new text of law. My concern, actually, it's not indeed the abroad, the experience between PDG, President, Chairman, and General Manager, that has not yet proved possibly that it is the best solution. But the problem in Lebanon is that the chairman, by law, has to be the general manager, but he can delegate his powers to a general manager, but under his responsibility. And this is the real legal problem. And general manager can do whatever he wants. The only responsible will remain the chairman. It is from this typical point of view and not from just the... Any other question in the... Please, Walid. Yes.
Walid Janadri. I'm very pleased to see those debates coming, and we can feel in Lebanon that the issue of governance is gradually taking speed. Now, you have a non-negligible amount of companies where the chairman is an operational CEO, if not strongly involved in operations, and at the same time the majority shareholder, if not the totality shareholder. And there's a risk in such a setup that the board becomes a rubber stamp board. Now, what would you have to say to those people if they were in front of you to convince them to get into a truly active board, although they are in a position of not listening to anybody?
That's a bit.
They have a lot to lose.
They have a lot to lose. If they don't listen, they have nothing to win, but they have a lot to lose.
From having an echo chamber, I mean, it's an echo chamber at the end of the day. If it's a rubber stamp board, it's an echo chamber. At some point in time, unfortunately, there will be a hurdle or a problem or a crisis that will wake people up to acting or to reacting. And you don't have to put yourself in that situation. Again, you can still have a large number of votes on the board, but at least have the board be independent enough to voice concerns. And as Fadi mentioned, if they're all internal or employees, again, how independent can they be? How voiceful can they be? So some of them start gradually. They start with a board of advisors. So they keep the power, but they bring solid and heavy weights to a board of advisors, and then starting to see the benefits gradually shift to a board of directors, maybe.
I fully agree.
Yeah. I'm Muhammad Haraki, and my question is addressed to Mr. Shemali, Frederic, and it's very simple. While I found your presentation very useful and interesting, I felt I didn't feel comfortable with the distinction when you talked about compliance between mandatory compliance and voluntary compliance. Because to me, the law, either it is international or national, or the regulation of the BDL, are in a way mandatory. Because if you don't respect the compliance as a whole, you are non-complying.
Yes. You're right. The body of laws has developed internationally, but the local law of the US is not applicable to me. An international convention is applicable to me. So my body of laws, the Lebanese laws, are applicable to me mandatorily. The conventions that I have signed are applicable. My constitution.
Can you afford not to apply OFAC or FATCA?
No, this is what I said about. Yes, these are the mandatory international standards, but there are standards.
And you say the Lebanese are mandatory too.
It became mandatory through banks. who mandatorily chose, mandatorily they have to do it, who mandatorily applied them. But there are rules that are not necessarily applicable to us, like the UK Anti-Bribery Act is an anti-bribery act applicable in the UK.
We have anti-bribery here.
We have our laws which are similar.
Which
Plus,
means at the end,
yes, they converge. Okay, but we chose to voluntarily comply with the full text of the UK. So this is what
or the US, which may be at a higher.
Sectorial, like pharmaceutical codes. Yeah.
Eliaon, thank you for this presentation, especially coming from three experts from three big and respectful institutions. I do agree with Joe that the culture is becoming more and more. Why? Because two things, major things. Because the one major thing is people applying corporate governance are obliged to apply it because to comply with the regulations. For example, for the banks, for the other institutions. But for family-owned businesses, they have the concern of the continuity. Number two, and to go back to, it goes for both of you, to go to back to going to the stock exchange. Now the culture and major funding places, they don't invest in companies if they don't have good corporate governance. And as we know in our case in Lebanon, we have the GDP equals to all the private sector debts through banks. So the only way to get liquidity now is to open our capital for foreign investors. And this one, we have to be transparent, we have to abide to all the regulations of governance in order to attract capital. And knowing through IFC that you partnered with, that the practices prove that you have 20 to 40% premium on your share if you have a good governance. Yeah. So I think if we'll have a proper stock exchange is good, but having liquidity in the market now, especially in the region, is essential as well. I did not really understand because we talked about chairman and general manager. I would like to know if you are dissociating the functions at your companies, how the chairman can be relaxed, having all the authorities to someone, and he will not interfere in his decisions while he is responsible on it. Yes. How do you apply it legally?
No, in our case, the legal part of it, we have separated the legal from the factual. So the CEO, we have several companies, among others a holding company here and a holding company abroad. So the CEO is legally registered as the chairperson in the Lebanese company. So, however, he is not the chairperson in reality at the board level and at the holding level. So we have almost circumvented or gone around the actual law, but implemented the separation fully. Now I agree, Frederic said some companies will swear that it is not good to separate. In the US, in Europe there is a trend to separate, in the US less so. Regardless of that, in our situation we decided to separate, and it's working very well without a problem.
I'd like to add something. Hadi was saying that if you want to lobby to change the law and to separate it, because the CEO is at the responsibility today of the personal responsibility of the chairman. The law as it is now, its drawback is that the chairman has to appoint the person he mostly trusts and not the most competent person. This is a major drawback. So maybe yes, it should be changed.
Hello, this is George Haney speaking again. In this conference, can you hear me? In this conference, I'm very happy with it, full of energy, full of optimism. Big companies trying to seek good investments in the country, which is a healthy way to grow. Especially in the surroundings we are having in the Middle East and all over the OECD forecast for the 2019 figures, where we always if we follow the financial news, we are aware that it might have a global war between major countries in the world. So I'm very happy with this, and exactly my question is, now after having we heard a lot about the digital stock exchange that has been since years or so. We've been hearing about it from his governor. So as big groups, what would be your risks and your contingencies or limitation, not to as it happened with my personal experience all over the Middle East, lots of big tycoons went bankrupt. And you know, legally speaking, when a company goes public, its shares are bought by people who you don't know. So these people might be having influence in the company decisions.
Yes.
And simulationally speaking, if a company have loss in retained earnings and has lots of fixed assets, so whenever a buyer is buying a share at a cheap price, is having a share in very expensive.
Yes, you know, if you're talking specifically about the digital platform, we didn't envisage this at our company, honestly. But if you're talking about a normal IPO, a normal listing, there are risks. We know that it's up or down, so we have to study the risk and take it. It's like if you're getting sure money from a lender, but your project isn't working. It's a risk to take.
We encourage you.
Frankly, I enjoyed listening to the speeches, and I totally agree with Joe in his presentation, and of course with Frederic. The issue is that, is corporate governance a goal by itself, or it is something that we need in order to raise our competitive advantage in the economy? This is very much important, because if we are thinking of corporate governance only to go to the public market or to the stock market, this is not the issue. Because in Lebanon, I do believe that, as Hadi mentioned, most of our companies are family-owned, and most of the companies that are family-owned, especially with the first generation, are not looking for the corporate governance. But what's happening with the second generation and third generation is that they are facing lots of problems, and these big companies are losing their value, are losing their most important asset, which is their reputation, their key money, their clients, their capacity, their capability on growing outside Lebanon. So this is a major issue that we need to address whenever we are thinking of corporate governance, because this is the key point to enter. If we enter this and we start thinking that it is a kind of a solution that will prepare company for the continuity, then this is the right way. Because as you mentioned, Frederic, it's not only the charter, it has to be the conviction of the company itself. The culture has to be there, but the culture will not be created without the conviction of the owners themselves. Mm-hmm. If they are convicted, then if they are convinced, then they can grow, this can carry on with them. Right. However, finally, one final issue is that once we have this culture, once we are convinced about this, then investors from outside will come in. The issue is that from outside, with all what's happening in Lebanon, and at the end telling them that we are not applying good governance, no one is ready to come and invest. So the numbers that you just mentioned, Frederic, will go down more and more if we don't apply good governance. If we don't tell others that we are ready to accept your investments. And so far, we did not do anything towards that, except very minor activities that are happening here and there related to governance. But they are not well organized. One final issue is that the Lebanese law so far obliges the chairman to be the general director. But there should be a modification to stay if someone wants to continue, and to give the permission for the company, for the bylaws of the company, to separate this, that the company has its board of directors and it has the right to appoint the general director.
I confirm that this, in principle, is the new text of the law.
Exactly. This is very much important. Thank you.
Thank you to all of you for your presence during this whole day, and hope to see you very soon again in IFG. Thank you. Thank you to you, Speaker. There is a small lunch served, please feel at ease to